I want to thank the Nelson Mandela Torres, Caribbean Philosophical Association, Marco Nex, the last Center of American Studies Institute for inviting me here. It's really an honor and a pleasure. And I want to make just a brief discussion or presentation with you. And it's really centered on 3 points. One is self-discovery. The second is the legacy of exclusion. The third challenge that this issue presents, which is the issue of Haitian community in the Dominican Republic. That's self-discovery. So I was born and raised in the Lower East Side, New York City, and my parents are Dominican. And very few Dominicans where I grew up, mostly Puerto Rican, mostly African American, and Chinese, Cantonese speaking Americans. That's why, even up to this day, I can say 1 to 10, yeah, I'm taking the shot in Cantonese. So I was a minority within a minority. And I always had a love affair with the Dominican Republic. So every time I used to travel for summers, for Christmases, and I love the Dominican Republic. I remember the first time I went to Washington Heights. Thank you. First time I went to Washington Heights, I was in heaven. And so, for me, particularly growing up in the 80s, during the crack epidemic, it was a refuge. I mean, I remember going there and, just visiting my family's cocoa farm and watching these hawks, or what I was, black hawks, at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, just lying looking for prey. And I'm here eating mosquitoes or Spanish lime right under a tree and thinking, this is where I'm supposed to be. So I love the Dominican Republic. It was my culture. By the time I got to college and doing my senior thesis, that romanticized notion of my heritage was challenged. And it was this document that really transformed the way I started to view the Dominican Republic in a more expansive and global way. And this is a primary document taken from the FDR Library in Hyde Park, New York, by Henry Norwood, U.S. Ambassador to Santo Domingo, then called Ciudad Trujillo after the dictator. And this is a document that he sends to Roosevelt during what everyone today calls the 1937 Haitian Massacre. And I could not believe it. I mean, this is what he writes. Apparently, with the approval of President Trujillo, a systematic campaign of extermination was directed against all Haitian residents. The drive was conducted with ruthless efficiency by the National Police and Army. I couldn't believe it, that it was science fiction. How can that be? How can my people, the people who received me at the airport with trays of white rum or dark rum with ice, and who love me and make me feel so whole in ways that U.S. culture could never. How could this be? Right? This idea that I share the history of the perpetrator. Right? Usually for me, the perpetrators were Turks against the Armenians, Germans against Jews, Hutus against Tutsis. But Dominicans, and it challenged me to rethink what I thought Dominican identity was. And the massacre, of course, was ordered by this man, Rafael Diaz Trujillo, who ruled from 1930 to 1961, ironically a light-skinned black man whose grandmother was Asian, and trained by the U.S. military, the Marines. And he ordered this massacre for a number of reasons. You'll see scholars, right? Whitening the border region, etc. But in terms of my research, I'm finishing my book now. The border region had always been a semi-autonomous region. The state had no strong presence for centuries there. So it was a hotbed for revolution and also for exiles. So when Trujillo comes to power in 1930, guess where all the exiles who are against Trujillo go to? They go to the border and they go to Haiti, where they plot. So one of the ways that Trujillo can secure his power is to resolve the issue of the border. The border limits at this time, they were undefined. So for the first 7 years, Dominican-Haitian relations are actually
very amicable. No anti-Haitian. If you read through the documents and the newspapers, it's really the honeymoon. Because Trujillo sought to resolve definitive territorial boundaries, which he did with Haitian President Daniel Vincent. In 1935 and 1936, both Congresses ratified the treaty. It's the first time both countries agreed, okay, this is where the Dominican Republic ends, and that is where Haiti begins. And Trujillo travels to Port-au-Prince and is greeted as a hero by the Haitians. And Stenio Vincent, sorbonne educated in Paris, by the way, mulatto, travels to Santo Domingo. And it's this euphoria. But Trujillo, well, an old dictatorial fox, understood that in order for him to secure power and consolidate the nation, he needed to secure the border region. And more importantly, referring back to Carlos, he's saying that this idea of prisons, yes, for the most part, Dominican-Haitian relations, mainstream scholarship, has been really been from the prism of it being adversarial, right? These glasses, right? Why the cops fight? Which, by the way, if you want to read a great article, Samuel Martinez, my friend at the University of Connecticut, has exactly this argument saying the fatal conflict model, right? How come we always see Dominican-Haitian relations in terms of conflict? But what happened, what the border confirmed was that historically, for the most of the history of Dominican-Haitian relations, that relationship has been collaborative on the border. So on the border, you had people who were mixed, married each other. And in 1937, in September, that all changed with the massacre because of his order, mostly the military, but also conscripted civilians. So this wasn't a popular uprising. This was kind of top-down, well-orchestrated a year before training. So this bicultural Haitian-Dominican world was destroyed. So was the massacre a success? This massacre that killed from 10,000 to about 18,000 Haitian men, women, and children? Yes, for about the first year. After the first year, guess what happens? Their Haitian border markets resumed. Haitian Dominicans are traveling to Haiti. They're getting married. They're baptized. So, if the objective and the goal of Trujillo was for the massacre to de-Haitianize the border region, it was a failure. The massacre failed. Okay? Well, it was a success in terms of what happened after the massacre is that you have this major Dominicanization project, el Proyecto para Dominicanizar la Frontera. And what happens after 1937, you have all these laws being passed, provinces, hamlets, little towns that have Creole Haitian sounding names, they get converted to Spanish Catholic names or named after Trujillo, like you see in the bottom. Provincia Independencia, independence, right? From whom? Haiti, right? Or benefactor province. Who's the benefactor? The benefactor, Trujillo, right? Provincia de San Rafael province, after Trujillo. And at the very top, Provincia Libertador, a liberator province. So there's an amazing kind of urban planning on a major scale that occurs on the border to Dominicanize the region. Right? And so it's a project of state formation and state building. So the government builds military forts, schools, like this one in the Havon that's still there by the Jesuits, hospitals named after founding fathers like Mella, political party offices, right, all over, because how do you know that the Dominican state is on the border? Because of its institutions, right? I tell my students all the time, how do you know you're going in when you go to those weekends of debauchery in Montreal, Canada, or Toronto? How do you know you're in Canada, right? The flags, the buildings, the currency, the same thing happened. And here you have, these are the words described at the bottom. A very famous saying that I grew up with here because my parents also lived through here dictatorship. My best friends are men of work. This kind of work ethic that you are my friend and you're loyal to the government if you work, right? And another way to see that is, as long as you're working, you won't plot against them, right? Churches, roving priests, right? Going into the space that is very much Dominican Haitian, of mixed unions, and trying to bring Dominican culture to this border region that for centuries had been abandoned by the state. So, even though you have an enormous unprecedented investment on the border by the Dominican state, by the establishment of these institutions, right? And you have a genocidal massacre or a campaign of ethnic cleansing, on my words, extermination, right? Used by U.S. government official. The project failed because I looked at the documents by Trujillo's own officials from 1938, 1939, all through the 40s, and what are they saying? They're saying they're still trading with each other, they're still crossing the border, they're still crossing the border to baptize them. We don't know what to do, right? And so what I want you to leave here today is so that the Haitian massacre was a success in terms that it interrupted centuries of collaborative relations in a region that was semi-autonomous and where the state presence was very weak, right? So in a sense, Trujillo lost. He lost in terms of not achieving his goal of ridding the border of the Dominican Republic as of Haitians, right? And here again, musical bands play European music, European instruments. It's like this new, strange musical genre that we said that referred to as balos, right? Very African-based. We don't want any of that. We want Dvorak, right? We want Schubert, right? We want, Mozart's, Requiem. If Trujillo failed to stop collaboration between Dominican and Haitians, then these people won. And these are what I call the Revenge of the Nerds. My chapter is called, the Guaraguas. These are the hawks, these are the conservatives. These are the elites, mostly white, university-trained Dominicans who were responsible for modern-day anti-Haitianism. Now, anti-Haitianism had always existed, ever since 1844, right? But what happens under Trujillo is that this historic but diffuse anti-Haitian sentiment is crystallized by a coterie of intellectuals supported by the state. The first time this happens. Okay? And by the way, in terms of ethnic cleansing history or the history of genocides, the Haitian massacre is unique in the sense that usually in the 20th century, when there's a genocidal massacre or campaign of ethnic cleansing, usually the ideology is already in place. And then you have the violence, right? So the Holocaust, you have all these anti-Jewish laws, then Kristallnacht, and then deportation. What happens in the Dominican Republic is the opposite. Up to 1937, there were friendly relations. There was no state official ideology spewing out like you hear the Hutus in 1994 saying, "Tutsi da cockroaches, you must kill them." None of that. So it's a very weird and anomalous phenomenon that occurs, right? Where the ideology of hate comes after. Comes after the killings. But these men will win where Trujillo lost, because along with the massacre, to justify the massacre, you need an ideology to justify why you had to get rid of all these people. And these were the intellectuals. And we still feel their presence today through their writings, through their novels, through their government decrees, through their collections of history books. These are the men who supported the ideological framework that is still relevant to us. It's true, we should look at all prisons regarding, when we examine Dominican-Haitian relations. Yet, there's one major prism that seems to predominate, and that is the adversarial prism. People ask, why? Fearing Haitians, fear invading, right? They're black, and it's because of them.
And the one on the left, he's the former president. He's Trujillo's right-hand man. And he served as president in the 50s. And he served as president in the 80s and the 90s. And he wrote books like The Island, Backward Island, justifying a very biological, kind of anachronistic 19th century term, the innate inferiority of Haitians compared to Dominicans, right? And the reason they are neighbors, right, is because they left texts like this. Manuel Apeña, which is one of the former intellectuals, right? This is clear, right? Mainstream in the 40s and 50s. But the problem is, when Trujillo is deposed and killed, you have a leftist historiographical response, right? But there has been no equal institutional response to anti-Haitianism. So for example, in the US, you have slavery, Jim Crow laws, segregation. But after that, what do you have? You have legal remedies. You have Brown versus Board. You have the 1964 Voting Act. You have BET. You have this cultural kind of response, institutional and cultural. In the Dominican Republic, you don't have that. So you have, because of these intellectuals, a legacy of exclusion where today, thousands of Dominicans of Haitian descent are excluded because the Constitution says you're born in the Dominican Republic except if you're a child of tourists or you're in transit. Guess what category the government has systematically viewed this population of Dominicans of Haitian descent? You've been in transit here for 20, for 30, for 40 years. We have deportation. We have example of Jose Francisco Peña Gómez, was a Dominican patriot, but could never ascend to the presidency because of his Haitian ancestry. And in 2005,